So throughout the course of this past week, I've been reflecting on John 13. It's a text that we get on Maundy, Thursday, so you may remember hearing it not that long ago. And it's a text that is very much around kind of this idea on Maundy, Thursday, that we do acts of service, which Christ washed the disciples' feet that night. And also we gather around the table for the Holy Eucharist, and like they did on that last night. And so these are all acts of love, and lo and behold, at the end of this, I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. That you love one another. And so I spent the last few days really kind of focusing on what does it mean to love one another. And then we spent the week out of town and got in yesterday with a flurry of activity. And I got in the house and Mary Ellen said to me, "Did you hear about the shooting in Buffalo? Did you hear about the shooting in Buffalo?" And I said, "No, I don't want to know about it." And then I realized you have to open your eyes, right? So I flipped on my phone and I started looking up kind of what had happened. And the more I read, there wasn't much information out initially, but the proximity to Rochester, right? That caught my attention. The fact that it was a Tops supermarket, and that it was in the city limits or around the city of Buffalo, in a predominantly African American neighborhood, caught my attention. And so as I was reading through kind of what had happened, this line from Jesus kept coming up: love one another, love one another. Now, I don't think it's particularly profound for me to come to you this morning and say, boy, the world would be a better place if we just did that, wouldn't it? And it's almost Pollyanna now to suggest that, because that's not the world in which we live, right? And then I started thinking about all the ways that the Christian church, past and present, and undoubtedly future, has stoked fear, right? And anger. And I think about the language that we use in certain traditions around culture wars, right? Have you heard about those? And lived through, as we've lived through those. And I've been adamant about staying out of politics from the pulpit, because the second you take a political stand on something, you're going to alienate people, right? And so that's something that I'm super aware of. I have family on all sides of issues at any given moment and want to be respectful of where they're at. But I don't think it's so much a political issue as it is an issue of the love commandment and how we put that forward. And I don't want to be silent on certain things any longer, because I think what that does is it creates a vacuum, right? So there's certain Christianity, certain Christian churches that are going to get up this morning, and they're going to be a heck of a lot bigger than this gathering, a lot bigger. And they're going to tell their members not about the devastation that this young white man caused in an African American community, the devastation with, I'm assuming, an assault weapon. They're not going to talk about that. What they're going to talk about is they're going to bring up the culture wars, and they're going to start talking about the liberals want your guns, because after every incident like this, which we know, it's almost commonplace, isn't it? These mass shootings. across ages, after each one, there's that cry of, well, the liberals are going to want your guns, and then gun sales shoot up, right? So I got thinking about this, and I'm like, well, how do you combat this then? And then I realized, I'm engaging in the war, right? Because what happens is then we take on, or whatever your position is, taking on the opposite side of any kind of cultural issue, and then you immediately have this, right? And we go toe to toe. And in theology, we really go toe to toe because it is then a war about how to understand the Bible itself. People spend their entire lives studying, right, on all sides of this issue, studying the Bible. Sometimes, and I think this is rare to see what the Bible actually says, a lot of people read the Bible because they want to affirm what their position is already on something, which in theological circles is called proof texting, right? So I feel a certain way on a social issue, and I'm going to flip open my Bible. There's concordances where you can look up a word, and I'll tell you every place in the Bible that appears. The problem by just kind of not engaging it, right, is what I mentioned before, that it creates this vacuum, right, where it's assumed by people outside the Christian church that there's only one way to think about Christianity. There's only one way. And that is a turnoff for a lot of people because they see Jesus. And then they look at that model and they go, what? I want us for a minute to just kind of think about how we live our lives, how we process information, and are we in a state of fear and anger and pain and want to go to battle? Or are we, as we go about our day, in a place of breathing in the presence of God and God's Spirit and knowing that we are loved, right? Just that simple. And that we want to and need to love one another and care for each other, whatever that means, in extraordinary ways. You see the difference in that? Back in 1517, this is going to be short. Back in 1517, when I was just a kid, this now famous man, Martin Luther, went to a church in Germany and nailed the 95 Theses to the door of the outside of the church in Wittenberg. And it changed the trajectory of the life of the church. It started the Reformation, right? And the key thing that he said in those 95 Theses was, we have to get back to the presence of God. The church had gotten lost with all of its money and its power and its corruption and with the political scene. The church had gotten lost. And what I want to say to you, sisters and brothers in Christ, is it's about time. It's about time that we nail another 95 Theses to a door, because the church is lost. The center, the essence of Christianity is the love of Christ. We see it in each and every one of the readings. We're praising God in the psalm this morning. We're hearing about Peter going to the uncircumcised and reaching out to people that are different than him. We go to the Gospel of John, and just on the edge of death, Jesus is going to give his life for every single person, every single one. and he washes feet. And he loves people. He's not necessarily scared to the place where he's going to put up barriers. Even on the cross itself, he's having a conversation with the criminals to his left and to his right. That's how open this guy is. It is time in our church today to call things what they are. That is not the Christian message in Christianity that I know and love and is part of every fiber of my being. When that kid, 18 years old, living south of Binghamton, New York, not far from where I grew up, decided to get in his vehicle and drive to an African-American community yesterday and open fire on innocent people, because of why? Because he was told something and mechanized in a way, and I bet there was a Christian message that he heard that prompted him to do that. There is no excuse for that. And as fellow Christians, we are culpable in that if we just sit back and let that wash over us. I'm not saying to engage in the culture wars in terms of picking up a weapon. I'm saying to follow Jesus. Follow Jesus. Love one another. When you hear a different message in your midst that proclaims to be the Christian message, say no. If you're scared to do that because you think all this barrage of stuff is going to come at you, there are centuries of Christianity that is on our side. This pendulum is going to swing, but it's not going to swing by itself right now. It's not going to swing by itself. Love one another. Gather around the table. Create spaces of safety. Lift up prayers that bring the good news back into the conversation. Brings the good news back into the conversation. Let it be so.